How many gods does the Bible mention? Most Christians and believers will immediately say that there's only one God in the Bible, the one true God. But they would all be wrong. First of all, the God in the Bible, YHWH, is actually two gods that were merged into one. But I already made a whole bunch of Christians mad explaining that bit in my first video. Instead, let's talk about the other gods that you might find in the Bible, starting with the gods from Egypt. The Egyptian gods aren't directly mentioned in the Bible. However, they are referenced as gods that exist and have powers rivaling Yahweh's. Think of the burning bush, for example. No, not that one, the Moses one, the one that God used to call Moses. Hey, what up, Moso? I want to free my peeps from Egypt already, so you need to do that, I decided. Oh, but God, the Pharaoh has actual magicians and sorcerers. That's how we all know he's the Pharaoh. How will I prove that you sent me? Don't worry, Momo. I'm giving you an ace under your sleeve in the shape of your hand. My hand is always under my sleeve. What the hell is happening to my hand? It's all white. Yup, just as if you had leopard. Just put it in your pocket and take it out again. Oh, so the magic trick is that I can give my hand leprosy on command? And take it away, yeah. I don't think that's good enough for... Throw your stick on the ground. Oh my, that's a snake! Yeah, it changes back. Well, that's a little better, I guess. Yeah, so when anyone doubts that I sent you, just show them these magic tricks that I gave you to prove that you have my blessing, and that's it. And that is exactly what Moses did. When he and Aaron went back to the Pharaoh, Aaron transformed his staff into a snake. But Pharaoh got his own magicians. And not only were they able to do magic like Aaron and Moses, but they were able to replicate the exact same magic trick. The difference is that Yahweh's snake was bigger and more powerful, and his snake ended up eating the other snakes. The point of the story wasn't that Aaron and Moses were unique in their abilities. The point of the story is to show that their God could make a far more powerful version of the trick, proving he was the more powerful God. So if Yahweh gave his power to Moses and Aaron, who gave the power to the Egyptian sorcerers? That's right. This verse proves that the Egyptian gods are canon in the Bible. Yahweh is more powerful than them in the Bible, but I'm sure that's only because we don't have a story from the Egyptians' point of view of which god would win if their followers started a magical duel. Now, these gods aren't mentioned by name in the Bible, but you know who is definitely mentioned by name? Yahweh's arch nemesis. No, not the devil, his original nemesis, Baal. Baal is another major deity in the Near Eastern pantheon, which is the same pantheon that Yahweh comes from. And like Yahweh, Baal is also a storm god. However, he is a god of a different kind of storm. Yahweh is associated with destructive storms filled with lightning and wind, very similar to the storms typical of the area of Petra where he came from. Baal, however, is the god of the fertility of the land. His storms are more like rainfall that reinvigorate the land. Now, remember how Yahweh was originally represented with bull imagery? Well, Baal is also represented like a bull, except more humanized. Imagine the Minotaur or a primitive bull enthusiast furry. That's how Baal looked like. He might have even influenced the story of the golden calf, although this is just a conjecture. Baal and Yahweh are so similar that that's probably the reason why their followers were in constant arguments over who is superior in the biblical narrative. And as I mentioned in a previous video, it all started with Elijah. In the first book of Kings, chapter 18, he gathers all of the prophets of Baal and engages in a little competition. They would set up two bull offerings, one for Baal and one for Yahweh, and whoever God lit up their sacrifice first won. In the story, Baal's worshippers spent all day and night praying to Baal and hurting themselves to try to get his attention. Elijah, being the sassy queen he was, taunts them with the only sarcastic verse I can think of in the entire Bible, saying that maybe Baal is asleep or busy or traveling, telling them to scream louder. He doesn't say that Baal doesn't exist, even though this is a golden opportunity to say so, because he didn't believe Baal was a false god. He merely believed that Baal wasn't as good of a god as Yahweh, who obviously lights up his sacrifice as soon as Elijah asks, proving that Elijah was right, who then condemns all of Baal's worshippers to death. Why? Well, because Yahweh isn't a wise and all-forgiving God, at least not yet. He's a God of war who replies quickly, so they get sacrificed instead of converted. His name is also associated with Beelzebub, another Philistine god, Lord of the Flies or Lord of Filth, who also appears in the Bible. And it's often suggested to be a derogatory term against the worshippers of Baal, seeing them as flies attracted to excrement, although this is somewhat contested. Funnily enough, Jesus mentions him. In Mark chapter 3, verse 22, Jesus drives out demons and identifies Beelzebub as their prince, identifying him either as a very powerful demon or as Satan himself, depending on your interpretation. But there's a God that's different than all of these gods, because a lot of people believe this is the God, or rather the goddess, that Yahweh liked the most. Romantically, I mean. Asherah was a big goddess in the ancient Near East, particularly in the Canaanite pantheon, which, remember, is where the Israelites really come from. In the Canaanite pantheon, Asherah was primarily revered as the mother goddess, associated with fertility, childbirth, and creation. She was often depicted as a protector and nurturer. And she was also the main love interest of El, the chief god. If a creator chief god is married to a nice, heavenly, fertile mother, then you pretty much have 90% of people represented in the pantheon, men and women, which is why that happens over and over and over again in other mythologies of the time. And since El and Yahweh merged together to create the ultimate god, there's evidence pointing to Asherah also being venerated as Yahweh's consort. The only Yudahite temple discovered by archaeologists follows the general design of Solomon's temple, with an outer courtyard for sacrifices and an inner holy of holies, which is where Yahweh was venerated through the Ark of the Covenant. This other temple, however, is even older than that, and instead of the Ark of the Covenant, it has 2 stones with 2 incense altars. Now, look at this set of stones. One stone is always larger than the other. That seems to imply that this set was used to not only worship 2 different gods, but that one of those gods was considered a lesser deity. This is even more interesting when you consider that Yahweh's only ancient representation is not through traditional idols, but with a standing stone, since he is iconical. That obviously means that at least one of the stones is meant to represent Yahweh. The second one, however, has been theorized to be for Asherah. We know that the Israelites directly worship Asherah as a goddess, since the Bible tells us that she was one of the gods that Hezekiah removed from Israel when he implemented the reforms of exclusive Yahweh devotion. Plus, lots of archaeologists have found a lot of ancient Israelite female figurines with big boobies in ancient Israelite sites. And you know what they say about big boobs. They always represent a fertility goddess. We don't know how widespread the worship of Asherah was within the Israelites, but it had to exist and to be a problem big enough for the Bible to condemn it. However, that leaves you with no feminine deity to pray to, and people like praying to a woman sometimes. That is why Catholics introduced a different feminine deity to pray to, the Virgin Mary, our new Heavenly Mother, so fertile that she didn't even have to lose her virginity to have a baby. But there's a God that's not like these ones in the Bible, one that is definitely evil and who loves child sacrifice. And his name is Moloch. Moloch, or Melech sometimes, because the Bible is never consistent, is the most evil god mentioned in the Bible. In Leviticus, it tells Israel that they were not allowed to offer their children to Moloch, a warning that I wish parents would have heard of Dan Schneider. What, too soon? He is also one of the gods that Solomon, who according to Christians was the second smartest person alive, started worshipping. Moloch is God's worst enemy, with constant condemnations against him and his worship, which, remember, is always associated with child sacrifices. And it might all just be fake news, because when we ask experts about this God, like Israel Finkelstein, he, like many other experts, believe this all evidence about child sacrifices was fabricated. After all, nothing will put you off a god, like thinking he likes child sacrifice. Propaganda of people ritualistically killing babies has been used to demonize the opposing side as recently as October 7th. Oh, what? Too political?
No politique here.
But the funniest thing is that in its condemnation, the Bible made sure that we all remembered Moloch. The Bible is, at this point, pretty much the only evidence we have left of the existence of Moloch. If it wasn't because the Old Testament really didn't like him, he would have been long forgotten by now. But Moloch wasn't the only enemy of God. God is self-admittedly a pretty jealous guy, so obviously he was jealous of the god next door, Chemosh. Chemosh was the supreme deity of the Moabites, one of the neighbors of the Israelites. The national god of the Moabites was seen as a rival to Yahweh, the national god of the Israelites. It's kinda like my dad can beat up your dad, but with imaginary friends who end up influencing national policy for 1,000 years later. And that is why Chemosh appears so often in the Old Testament, often linking him with the Moabites in the feud or complaining that the Israelites were worshipping him, proving how the Israelites believed that he was a god as real as Yahweh. However, while Yahweh had many enemies, there's only one god that Yahweh fought directly. Sort of. Dagon was a West Semitic god, primarily associated with fertility, agriculture, and grain. And he is a mermaid man god, with the upper body of a human and the lower body of a fish. Probably because he's supposed to represent the fertility of the sea. Probably because they, like me, would also love to be submissive to King Triton. He wasn't just any god, he was another chief god, just like El, considered to be father of gods. That's probably why he was worshipped all over the Near East, especially in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, and Canaan, the cradle of Yahweh. Even the Philistines had temples for him, and that is how we know him in the Bible. In the book of Judges, we learn about Samson's last hurrah when the Philistines gather to celebrate their victory over Samson's and offer a sacrifice to Dagon, their god. It was a whole family event with a bunch of people of all ages eating and celebrating their god until Samson, who had conveniently grown his hair back, decided to use his Herculean strength to demolish the temple and kill everyone in it, men, women, and children, like a hero. That being said, unlike other national deities and despite the obvious feud between Philistines and Israelites, Dagon isn't mentioned as a direct enemy of Yahweh or the Israelites, so we don't have a long list of verses saying how Dagon's princesses are going to fall or something. We do, however, have a very interesting story in the third and final mention of Dagon in the Bible. In the first book of Samuel, we found how the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant, of which I make a video about soon. How do they do it if only Levites could touch it without dying? I don't know. But since it's such an important religious artifact, they placed the Ark in the temple of Dagon in Ashdod. And this was a huge mistake because you see, Yahweh, the most powerful God, was behind the Ark of the Covenant. And now that Yahweh was inside Dagon's temple, Yahweh could take his revenge personally. And he had had enough. He would teach the dumb Asherites who was a true God among gods. So the next morning, the Asherites went back to the temple and were horrified to find Yahweh's revenge. When they ventured inside the temple, they finally saw what Yahweh had done. They found, and I should probably put a trigger disclaimer here, because they found Dagon's statue. But not the way it used to be. They found Dagon's statue face down. Yeah, I also shudder to think about it. How does Yahweh do it? He really showed them that time. But it's getting late and the Bible mentions way too many gods to talk about in one video. So let's do a quick roundup with the gods that are mentioned only once or aren't as interesting. On this side, we have the Babylonian gods. Marduk, the head of the Babylonian pantheon, and their creator god is mentioned in Jeremiah. And Nergal, a god of the underworld and plague, kind of like Hades, is mentioned in the second book of Kings. On the other side, we have the Assyrian gods, starting with Nisroch, also mentioned in the second book of Kings. Tammuz is a god associated with fertility and seasonal cycles that Ezekiel sees Israelite women worshipping in Ezekiel. And the Queen of Haven is an unnamed goddess that is condemned in the book of Jeremiah. Oh, wait, she was probably a fertility goddess too? Much better. As we've seen, the Bible mentions a ridiculous amount of gods, and although the Bible often insults those gods and the one who follows them, you know what it never says about them? It never says that they are any less real than Yahweh. As we've seen, Yahweh was just a national god, and Israelites seemed to understand that other people from other nations were going to have other national gods. Sometimes the Israelites even tried their luck with those gods when they didn't get what they prayed for with Yahweh. It's only until later, when the Bible was getting compiled, that Yahweh evolves to require exclusive devotion, slowly but surely moving the Israelites from polytheism to henotheism, and later, during and after the Babylonian exile, solidifying the concept of Yahweh as the sole God of Israel, is when the group moved to be fully monotheistic. Once the Israelites were released from Babylon, the Jerusalem temple gave Yahweh unique prominence, and the writings from back then were the ones that became the holy texts that now we see as part of the Bible. If anything, I think it's a shame that it's only because of religious intolerance that the pantheon shrank so heavily, with just one God with all of the powers and his son, and also divine being with similar lesser powers, instead of a God of creation, a God of war and destruction, a goddess of fertility that poses with her boobies out, and a God to scare children. And that is why we need to go back to tradition. The Israelites believe all of these gods were as real as Yahweh, and even worship them sometimes instead of Yahweh. That is why Yahweh did all of those miracles, to prove he was the bestest God. And you know what else we don't have since we stopped believing in other gods rivaling Yahweh? Miracles. You think that's a coincidence? All I'm saying is that we should do what the most read prophet in the Bible, Elijah, did. We should put up 2 altars, one for Yahweh and one for Vishnu or any other god, and see which god sets on fire which altar first, to finally settle once for all which god is real. Till then, if you decide to believe in the God of the Bible, I just have one question for you. Which one?